forth with, I'm telling you, the idea that journalists are like radio announcers at a baseball game is not true.
Bob, you want to get in here
Yeah,
quickly,
just-
and then I'm taking some questions.
One about this, the market. I think in terms of the zeitgeist and the reaction of the public, or the complicated reaction to the public to these sorts of things, journalists are clearly secondary. That the primary thing is the price in the market, and the stock market in particular, which tends to dominate everything. And the trouble with these things is that by the time the markets react, it's already too late. And that's one of the things that happen. Two, in terms of, I mean, I've been complaining for years about television and about local newspapers and their coverage of business. They have no interest in it. They have and not only do they have no interest in it generally, and look what's happened to business sections across the country, the U.S. at least, as newspapers have suffered. The first thing to go is always the business section. In television, politics wins out always. It's more dramatic. It's not as complicated. Part of the problem here, I think, which is one of the things I think ties this panel, hard to believe, but ties this panel together in a way, I think is an agreement that things that are complicated are not done. Mm-hmm. And by not doing them, bad things happen. They don't do them because they don't think their audience will listen, and it's a cycle.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's about time that maybe journalists make things more relevant. Not so much journalists, because I think we've all struggled with talking to editors, and indeed very senior sort of editors, about making it relevant, and this story matters. So maybe it's time there's a bit of a look. Let's take a few questions. Go for it, Tony.
Well, when we're coming back to the credit bubble, I also see one strong interconnection, and that is advertisers and newspapers. And it's been the banks who've been the main advertisers or their subsidiaries. Yeah, I think we all here agree, and I have no reason to doubt that you all were correct and that you saw the crisis coming early. Bloomberg delivers a daily example of this, and you were the ones who had Paul Volcker on TV and on the reports in 2004, 2005, saying the current account deficit in the US won't work any longer. I'm not saying this as a paid advertisement or as I want to get a job with Bloomberg. I'm just saying you are the ones who were really doing the beat. And what I'm missing here in the whole area, in the whole hall here, is those people from CNBC, from the Bubble Street Journal, from the Financial Times, and so on. They all didn't see it coming. Why aren't they here? Do they feel guilty? Thank you.
They can sit here if they like.
I suppose Raymond and I were working at CNBC at the time. We weren't. Anyway, do you want to pick up on that? Danny, you want to say something there?
Well, I think that there's an issue here of personal responsibility on the part of people in this room. I'm not here really to play a blame game. I don't know half as much as most of the people on this panel about financial, the complexities of financial markets, and I don't claim to. But I do know something, I think, about fairness and justice. And this is something that seems to be missing. There's a woman who teaches at the Harvard Business School who wrote in Business Week, named Shoshana Zuboff. And she was writing about the consequences of all of this and the lack of accountability by people in the industry up until this moment. And this goes for journalists also. Whose fault is it? It was their fault. I was right, everybody else was wrong. And she writes, shouldn't the individuals whose actions unleashed this devastating consequences be held accountable? And she says, I believe the answer is yes. That in the crisis of 2008, the mounting evidence of fraud, conflicts of interest, indifference to suffering, repudiation of responsibility, and systemic absence of individual moral judgment produced an administrative economic massacre of such proportions that it constitutes an economic crime against humanity.
I think
this
she
is
needs
a
an
Harvard
editor.
Business School professor, not me here.
All right, let me get another question in here, because we've got about not even 5 minutes with this. Then we're going to introduce two new speakers. Then we're coming back for another 15 minutes of questions. So I'm getting one here, one from Jason, and then I promise you, you're first on the next session. Ma'am.
Thank you very much. Christina Mutianczyk, Business Weekly in Prague. Two questions. How do you comment on the budgets allocated to training financial journalists? For example, I would like to know if Bloomberg allocated more money to training journalists in the Baltic states or in Central Eastern Europe to avoid any kind of similar situations. And the second question, there are many voices saying that banking is moving from one-off deal type of relationship to more relationship banking. Don't you think that is the time for media to go in the same direction, and instead of just delivering breaking news and then, we've done with it, going more into listening to our readers and delivering stuff adapted to their needs, and which would probably also solve our financing models?
Well, I have a huge advantage versus probably any other journalist in the room, in that I work for a private company with annual revenues of $5 billion a year. So, and we are completely independent of any advertising. If every advertiser stopped with us tomorrow, we'd still make $5 billion a year. It's negligible. In terms of training, we follow the money. If we are gaining new readers in the Baltics, we put more journalists in there and we put more resources into training them. If we are getting more readers in the Middle East, for example, which is actually the most pertinent example, the demand for news in Dubai and Abu Dhabi is vastly outstripping anywhere else in the world. So this year, I think we've hired 30 journalists in that region, and we're going to hire 10 more, I think, between now and the end of January, all of whom will go through a fairly severe training program so that they can produce charts like that and understand finance, as well as training on writing, reporting, and how you break news and scoops. I think the same answer to your second question, though, follow the money. The banks will do relationship banking if they think they can make money doing it. They'll do deal banking when they can make money doing that. I think it's quite Darwinistic in that way.
And if I might add to that, I've done quite a bit of training in Russia, also in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, and in South Africa recently with financial journalists. But I can tell you the motley crew that I was given to train either came from normal television and knew nothing about the markets because they were the only people who could do television. The next bunch were academics. There were traders. There were some people in the markets. So you also have to remember that particularly in television, radio, there's a little bit of entertainment there, and there's some people that might have a great face for radio that'll never make it on television, and sadly the guy who's got the great face for radio probably knows 10 times more than the babe we've got on Russian television delivering the morning news right now. So it's a bit tough, but I've been faced with both at the minute. I know you want to come back here. I'm going to get one more question here, and then we're going to put in our next two speakers, and then we've still got 15 minutes of more questions, so get them ready. And I'm noticing you. You'll be the first on the next one. Go, quick.
Hi, Jason Schenker, Prestige Economics. I really like the leitmotif that Danny's introduced of comparing the financial crisis in terms of other kinds of journalism, for crime journalism. And along these lines, I guess I'd like to ask the question to the panel, are we being too harsh on financial journalists? After all, we expect the financial journalists to have stopped this crisis, to have influenced people's thoughts, but we would never expect a journalist in other areas to stop a terrorist, arrest a criminal, get involved in a warfield battle, or negotiate a hostage release. Reporters are just expected to report the news, but yet it seems in this case we're holding financial reporters to a higher standard. How do you feel about that?
We're going to kick that one off with you, Danny, just because you've been accusing us of everything, and then we'll go right to you, Chris.
I don't feel, people don't assign themselves. When I worked for CNN and ABC News, I didn't wake up in the morning and decide what I was going to cover. I had editors, I had, producers who told me, this is what we're going to be doing and assigned me the story. Sometimes they listened to me and very intelligently allowed me to do what I do well. But a lot of times they didn't. They just told me what to do. And so the idea that the journalists themselves, are responsible, I don't think so. I think it's within the whole matrix of the media, what stories get attention, what goes to page 1, not what goes to page 38. That has to be looked at. And who makes that decision and why? And I think a lot of the people in the editorial stratosphere missed all of this, much worse than the financial journalists who were kind of talking to them and telling them about it. But I think there is a question of media complicity in big issues. We know this is the case in the Iraq War. We know that a lot of people got into selling more than they got into telling, and they were accepting government propaganda, certainly in the United States. This has been sort of well documented. So I think there is a degree of complicity here and, co-collaboration, if you will, between the media sector and the financial sector for reasons of class, perhaps, of consciousness, of, general shared values and the like, and an inability to look at it through the eyes of the people who are being hurt.
Chris, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the panel's agreed